So today we're moving on to our third beatitude. We have seen in the first 2 weeks, I believe, what are the fundamental and underpinning characteristics of a Christian. Those first two beatitudes, which actually we said, unless these are in place, we can't move any further through the beatitudes, let alone through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. And we said that we must know and we must display these in our lives. Not just a matter of understanding them with our minds, but actually these things must be displayed in each and every one of us if we're Christian. The Christian must first of all be poor in spirit. Essential that they, in the very depths of their soul, not in their minds, in the very being, know their need and their dependency upon God. A total poverty, that's where we must get to. We must understand that even though we may have riches of coin, we may have properties aplenty, but the reality is that we are impoverished before this God. We're like little ants crawling around on the floor when we compare ourselves to the God of heaven and earth. And we said very strongly, and we re-say it again and restate it again, that the Christian will know that they belong to the kingdom if they find themselves in this poor state. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Last time we looked at those who grieve and mourn. Every single one of us should find ourselves in that place with our own sin and looking at the state of the world. A grief that is not only a few tears of regret, but a grief that's working in as a godly sorrow that then leads on to repentance, that then leads on to the knowledge of salvation, and then it starts working all of these wonderful things into our character. That's what this true godly grief and sorrow does. We are to be deeply aggrieved about the sin that remains in our lives. As we were talking about on Friday, we're not antinomians. We're not walking around thinking it's all right to do whatever it is that we please and sin as the day is long because God has put his son on the cross. No, that's an abomination. We are to hate the bits of sin that's left in our flesh. We are to, as Paul said, we are to focus and mortify and kill it off before it even becomes a reality in our lives. And we're to be deeply concerned, friends, for the state of our world, for Crich, for Derbyshire, for Britain, and for the whole world. Deep concern for what's happening in Iran. Deep concern for the wickedness that is entrenched within the societies of every single nation of this world. A deep sorrow, a godly sorrow that will drive us on a Tuesday evening to be in there weeping for the sins of the nations. And then, when we grieve like this, we're assured that we will know the comfort of God. The parakaleo given by the Paraclete himself. Comfort from the Comforter. So this week we move on as Matthew Henry puts it. I told you last week how he says it. The meek are happy. Not walking around with a smile, cheesy grin, like a Cheshire cat all the time, but internally satisfied and prosperous and blessed because they are actually finding this characteristic in their life. So as we look at this passage together, we're going to look at the experience that Moses had in Numbers chapter 12. And we're going to hopefully learn what it is to be meek. We're going to hopefully look at how we can ensure that this blessing of a meek spirit belongs to us so that we can be happy and inherit the earth. And we're going to try to look at what it means to inherit the earth. What is that additional blessing to those that are meek? As I said on Friday as we were going through one or two things, I don't know everything. I haven't got all the answers, but this book that we have in front of us, it leaves us short of nothing that we need to know in relation to these. And this is the thing that we should be finding our head in most of the time. Everything that we need to know about God, about our lives, about godliness is in here. And so we will be looking at it together. So firstly, our constant reminder to ourselves with regards to all of these characteristics is that they do not belong to us by nature. We are not meek by nature. And again, just a short 2 minutes, if not even that, a short few seconds of self-examination will bring us to the conclusion we're not meek. We're far from it. Friends, I want to suggest that there are some of us that need to take note very seriously of what we're hearing this morning. But the reality is that all of us need this working in our lives. And hopefully as we progress through this passage of Numbers 12, we'll understand why. The commentator Gill makes this note, that a meek life is a God-controlled life. A meek life is a God-controlled life. It's a life that God is fully in control of. We must firstly understand who God is in comparison to us as we start looking at this. We've already looked at knowing that we are poor in spirit. We've already looked at knowing that we need to grieve, but that should work these characteristics in us, the rest of the ones that are listed in the Beatitudes. We need to understand our smallness and his greatness. And part of meekness is understanding that God is God and we aren't. God is God and we are not. Secondly, as we look and gaze into that even more, we need to continue to recognize our own sinfulness. This meekness is not going to work in our lives unless what we were talking about last week is a continual thing in our lives. It's not just a one-off repentance. It continually works in our lives. We must continue to mourn, continue to grieve for that ongoing sin. We must continue to be comforted. And so meekness only works out of a continuation of the first two. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important that that foundation is absolutely in place. So, what is being meek? Most of this morning's sermon is focused on that one question. And I'm hoping that as we see Moses' reaction to Miriam and Aaron in this passage, that we're going to understand exactly what it is to be being meek. You may remember that when we looked at the fruits of the Spirit, this came up. Gentleness is referred to in the King James Version as meekness. And so there is going to be some crossover between what we looked at when we were looking at the fruits of the Spirit in the evening to what we're talking about this morning. But it's not going to be a total rehash of the same sermon, because meekness is the fruit of being meek. So we need to understand what being meek is in order to know how meekness can be a fruit in our lives. You may remember the definition of meekness that I gave from the Bible dictionary, but if not, here it is again. In the New Testament, meekness refers to an inward attitude, something internal that's being worked into us, whereas gentleness is expressed rather in an outward action. So meekness is something that happens internally. Gentleness is that meekness working its way out in an outward action. So the meek then are those with a right or a right attitude. A right and a righteous attitude. If we were to measure ourselves just on those two things alone, outside of Christ, we completely disqualify ourselves from being meek straight away. Our attitude at times is far from right and extremely distant from righteous. And so we see that this is not of our natural makeup. So, firstly, let's have a look at the negatives. What meek doesn't mean. As we said when we were doing meekness, meek doesn't mean being weak. It doesn't mean that you have to be a weakling. It doesn't mean that you don't fight. It doesn't mean that you don't engage ever. That's not what being meek is all about. Being meek is not about avoidance. It's not shunning certain things and not getting involved. It's not hiding yourself underneath a blanket because you don't want to face certain things that are going off. It's not being frightened. It's not being superficial. It's not any of those things. It's not being quiet. It's not being timid. It's not being shy. It's not avoiding the hard conversations that sometimes we may have to have. That's what being meek is not about. It's also not being about being lazy or sloppy. In other words, accepting anything just for the sake of peace. Oh, well, we won't discuss that. We won't get into that because we're of meek character, we're gentle, and we don't want to talk about it for the sake of keeping peace. That's not meekness. In fact, in most cases, that's compromise. So they're the things that meekness aren't. So let's have a look at Moses and see what this is all about. And I want us firstly to ask ourselves two questions with regards to the passage that we've read from Numbers chapter 12. Firstly, why does the writer, which is possibly and probably Moses himself, stop the narrative at verse 3 and add in these words? And they're in brackets. Now the man Moses was very humble. In the King James Version, it's meek. Now the man Moses was very meek, and he was more meek than all the men who were on the face of the earth. Why is he stopped there and placed that sentence in the middle of the narrative that's going on? We'll look at that in a moment. And secondly, What is the writer telling us about Moses in relation to him being meek? It doesn't really define meekness within the passage in terms of a dictionary definition, but his character and his nature and how he responds is how we are going to define the meek man. So, firstly, why does the writer add this in at verse 3? Well, if we're readers of the word, which I'm hoping that we all are, avid readers, daily readers, big portion readers, then we'll know that Moses went through a hard time. Let's just read what John Gill says. When compared with others, he was the meekest man that ever lived, whereby he became the fittest person to have to do with such a peevish, perverse, and rebellious people as the Israelites were, whom no other man could well have bore with. Constant moaning, constant whining, constant rebellion, constant questioning, constant dissatisfaction, constantly up and down with their oaths. We will do all of these things. And then the next 5 minutes they found making a golden calf. Backsliding. And then as we read today, as we've got into this portion from Numbers chapter 12, we start seeing the grumbling not only came from the people, it came from his brother and sister. Two people who were working closely with him. They were jealous of his position. They were judgmental about his marriage. And they started to balk and complain. Miriam said these words, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" Despising even those others, the 70 elders that have been prophesying in the chapter before, looking onto it, and just a jealousy throughout. That's the total opposite of what we're talking about this morning. Now I want us to take a minute and think how we might have reacted if we were Moses. Let's be honest with ourselves. What's wrong with these people? Getting up in the morning and hearing them whining again about the stuff that they've got to collect and they're sick of eating it. What's wrong with them? They ask for food. God's given them food. Selfish, arrogant people. That's probably the things that we would have had in our own hearts and minds. How many more times have I got to tell them? How many more times have I got to guide them? How many more times have I got to remind them what God has said? That could have been his attitude. It may have been ours. Just wait until I give them a piece of my mind. Do you ever feel like that about your brothers and sisters? Oh, I'll give them a piece of my mind. I'm going to let them know just how wrong they are. That will show them. That'll shape them into action. You know, if I point out with a vicious tongue and make them see exactly what they're doing. Who do my brother and sister think they are? They know I was called at the burning bush. They know that I'm there speaking face to face with God like no other man. Who do they think they are? I don't know how we would have reacted. I think Moses was given a supernatural abundance of patience. But the reality is, and I'm thinking about myself, you can only answer for yourselves, that actually in this circumstance, we would have found ourselves with some inner anger, fleshly anger, that ended up coming out in words and actions that were from the flesh. That's how I think that I would have reacted. That's how I think that probably most, if not all of you, would have reacted in the same circumstance. So what is this passage showing us about Moses in terms of his meekness? How did Moses act? Well, if you read through all the ups and downs that he goes through, you'll see that really he acts in the same way through every single challenge that he's met with by these people. John Gill again, he comments like this: being seldom angry. And when he was, it was generally, if not always, when the honour of God was concerned. That's the only time he got angry, was when God's honour was come against. And not on account of his own person and character. Moses didn't react out of the flesh, that's what Gill is saying. Not towards himself, not about his own hurts, not about his own queries about the people. He only acted in righteous anger when God's name was being challenged. And that, friends, is key to this whole meekness. Absolutely key for each and every one of us. If you review the actions of Moses, they are never personally reactive. He doesn't just flip. He doesn't just act from the flesh. He's not reactive to the circumstance. As Gill says, God controls him. In chapter 14, when Israel refuses to enter into Canaan and wanted to choose a new leader, what did he do? We don't read that he went off and sulked, or that he kicked off. He doesn't say, I'm done with you lot. No, he goes in with Aaron, and they fell on their faces before all of the children of Israel. God was going to afflict the people with all manner of diseases as a result of their disobedience. But we see Moses in his meekness pleading with the God of Israel, reminding him of his character and of his words. Listen to what he said, and you'll know this well. The Lord is long-suffering, is reminding God of who he is. The Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation. And then he asks the Lord of heaven and earth, pardon the iniquity of this people. Pardon them, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. I stand open-mouthed at that reaction, because I know what I'm like. What was God's response? I have pardoned according to your word, according to your request, according to your petition, according to your meekness. We need to measure ourselves against this, and seriously measure ourselves. Who are we? What are we? How do we react? How do we speak? How do we respond? Do we know when to be quiet? Do we know when to speak and when not to speak? Do we trust God? Moses was all of those things. If we look back to Numbers 12, can you find anything there that Moses says? In that part where he's been accused and shunned by his brother and sister. The only thing that, I mean, if he did add it in, which most people say that he did, he's talking about himself there, not in a boastful manner. But now Moses was the most meek man. That's the only thing that I can see that he says. But he's quiet. He doesn't open his mouth and start spouting out his authority. He doesn't go and say to them, look, you know who I am in the eyes of God. He says nothing. And through this meekness we see the vindication of God come very, very quickly in response to Aaron and Miriam. Let's read from verses 6 to 8. Remembering that in verse 2 it says, and the Lord heard it. Then he said, that's God, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. That's what he does with the prophets. But then he says, not so with Moses, not so with my servant. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly and not in dark sayings, and he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid? Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? God vindicates him. God clears him. God tells Aaron and Miriam exactly who Moses is. Moses was not perfect. He knew and actually declared many times his faults and his weaknesses. We read that he wasn't able to enter into the promised land because of his own frustrations. He hit the rock a second time. And he wasn't allowed to go into the promised land because of that. He wasn't faultless. We read early on of how he killed a man. The reality is that a meek man has an attitude towards God and towards others in the light of the truth that he has learned about himself. Poor in spirit, those who mourn will create meekness in a man. I'm going to read a portion that Matthew Henry wrote sometimes I read these things and I think, what's the point of me trying to say it better than this man said it? So here we go. The meek are those who quietly submit themselves to God. Question for us. Who submit themselves to his word. Question for us. Who submit themselves to his rod. We're getting a little bit more deep now. Exactly the type of things we were talking about, the decrees of God. Submitting ourselves to the authority in submission to God over all of the things of our lives. Not just Blackpool Pier, but the depths that we sometimes get to in the struggles and the hardships that we go through. Submitting to the rod. The meek are those who follow his directions and comply with his designs through knowing the word. They are gentle towards all men. All being the imperative little word. Gentle to all men. Again, we know what that means. Who can bear provocation without being inflamed by it. That's not me. Not in my own strength. Not in my own profession of being a Christian. That's not me. I get inflamed by my own 12-year-old son sometimes, let alone what somebody outside says. They are either silent or return a soft answer. Bearing in mind what we started with, what meekness is not. This is how they respond to all of those issues that need to be talked and spoken about. With gentleness and with softness. And sometimes not at all. The meek are those who can show their displeasure when there is occasion for it. Not hot-headedness, not flying off the handle, but dealing with it in a godly manner. When there is occasion for it. Not when I want to have my say. Not when I want to have the last word. Not when I think I'm right. But when there's an occasion for it. Without, it says, being transported into any indecencies. Reacting in a human way. Who can be cool when others are hot. And in their patience keep possession of their own souls. Have you ever been in an occasion where you're talking to somebody who's really making you reactive, and sometimes you're not acting like a Christian at all? Keep possession of their own souls. When actually they can scarcely keep possession of anything else. They are the meek who are really and hardly provoked, but quickly and easily pacified, and who would rather forgive 20 injuries than revenge one single one of them. Having the rule of their own spirits. That's how Matthew Henry sort of compounds this. And I couldn't have done that any better. There's no point in doing it. We must measure ourselves against these things. We must measure ourselves against what God calls meekness, not what we call meekness. So how can we ensure that this blessing of meekness belongs to us? The answer is simple, really. We have one who we can learn from. Christ himself. He said, and we've quoted this many and many a time, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." For what? I am meek and lowly in heart. Christ was the greatest example of a meek man. He was more meek than Moses. And what did Christ mean by this? Was it in his own ability? Some of it, I think. But actually it's because he was submitted to his Father. How many times do you read in portions where he's saying, "I only do the things that I see the Father do. I only speak the things that I hear the Father say"? That's key. He was meek in the way that he came. No pomp and circumstance like Israel may have expected for the King of Kings. Came as a lowly baby in a stinking cave, being laid in a trough which animals fed from, which probably hadn't been washed. The way he spoke. Now again, we know that he spoke with authority. We know that he spoke with such clarity in terms of his teachings. We've read that in Matthew chapter 5, that the multitudes were amazed. We know he rebuked. We've read it. But it's the manner in which he did these things. Lowliness, meekness, gentleness with authority. The way he acted, his actions, all of his works, his healings, his compassion, his care, his rebukes. All of that done in alignment with how his Father would have it done. The way he taught, the way he suffered, the way he died. All of it was done in meekness. And friends, we must learn of him. We must take this book and we must read the Gospels over and over again and see how he reacted in each and every circumstance. We must read the rest of the New Testament that puts that in a spiritual context to how we respond in our lives as Christian people in every circumstance. We have no right at all to respond, act, speak, and do anything in the flesh. That's wrong. Our response should be out of this meekness that we are talking about today. Paul says this in Ephesians 4. "I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and meekness." That's our walk. That's how we must shape ourselves. James says, "Therefore, laying aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted," the King James says, "the engrafted word, which is able to save your souls." Let it work in you. Receive his word with meekness. Be chastised where it chastises you. Be encouraged where it encourages you. Be taught where it teaches you. Be humbled where it humbles you. Approach it with meekness and allow it to work in your lives. Because it's not just a set of words, it's the Spirit of Christ speaking to each and every one of us of how to live this Christian life as a meek man. And so our whole lives must be governed by this. We must operate in the Spirit and not in the flesh. We must be able to receive criticism, complaint, grumblings and contentions in the right attitude. We must be able to listen to what people are saying, and just as much as be able to be poor in spirit and mourning grief through our own recognition of sin, we should listen to what other people are saying about us from time to time. What are you going to do if I say to you something about your character that you don't like, if I'm doing it in the right spirit? What's going to be your response? Poor in spirit, those that mourn, those that are meek. What am I going to do if one of you comes and says to me, Darren, you're starting to get a little bit arrogant? I'm going to weigh it. And where I need to listen, I'm going to listen. And if enough people tell me, then there's something wrong. So we need to be able to have that type of personality and character in each and every one of us. It's not just about how we weigh ourselves. We must be able to respond or not respond accordingly in the right attitude. We must be able to be angry righteously, but not sin. We read, don't we, of Jesus making a whip with cords. He was righteously angry. He didn't sin. We must be able to forgive and not hold grudges, personal fleshly things. We must be able to bear patiently. We must be able to seek peace. We must be able to show gentleness, kindness, and pity. And we must allow, and this is critical, in every circumstance, every hardship, for vengeance to be taken by the Lord and not ourselves. It's dangerous when we start taking things into our own hands, because we're acting in revenge. Let the Lord do it. Let the Lord bring vengeance. Let the Lord lift us up if that's what he wants to do, and clear us of a situation. Vengeance is mine, he says, and we must allow him to have that. Before we move into that last section on inheriting the earth, friends, we need to hear this. Some of us more than others. We need to improve. We need to learn more from Christ. So what is the external and additional benefit that this meek character has? Well, he will inherit the earth, Jesus says. Christ is possibly referring to Psalm 37, verse 11. And to the Jews, inheriting the earth was the promise of a physical land. They would inherit that to which God had promised. It would be theirs. Our blessing is not so much physical land. I'm not expecting that God's going to give me a field down in Crich somewhere. Might be Janet's. But it's not that I'm going to inherit a portion of land somewhere. But it's a spiritual blessing to our lives. And it's an eternal one. Just imagine if we weren't meek people, we wouldn't be able to endure in long suffering all the persecution that we're going to get to when we get into the latter beatitude. It's not going to be there. We're not going to endure it patiently. We're not going to respond godly. But if we've got this meekness, then we will inherit peace with God and man, where it depends upon us. Our relationships on a day-to-day basis, whether that's in here or whether it's with those that we work with, those that we communicate with, those who we talk to, our neighbours, our friends, our families. Those relationships are going to be enhanced when we are men that are meek. We'll be able to have healthier conversations. We won't want to keep winning arguments all the time. We won't want to keep having the last word. We won't want to keep thinking that we're right in everything that we say. We will have better conversations, better relationships, more respect and honour for one another. Less disputes and arguments. Even on those things that, we may disagree in terms of biblical secondary things. If we're having those conversations in meekness, they will be good and healthy conversations. They won't be fraught and tense and they'll be good. And so this applies to everything that we can imagine in our relationships. And yet, there is a greater blessing. And that is that of that holy abode, that thing that we are being made fit to dwell in. The heavenly mansion that Christ has gone to prepare for each and every one of us. Those who know their need of God, those who mourn for their sins, those who live life in accordance with that knowledge and are meek men and women, they are the ones that are going to inherit the new heavens and the new earth. So what say you to all of this? I'm hoping that it's made you think, examine, take note, take action, pray, seek, change. What say me? I'm praying that I will take note, take action, pray, seek, and change, and become more of a meek man. We must go away from here and seek to be more like the meekest man that has ever lived. Moses was the meekest man on the face of the earth at his time. There was one greater to come. And he never did anything out of selfish impulse, out of fleshly reaction. He responded and reacted in the way that his Father would have him respond. We must go away and seek to be more like him acting and speaking and living, doing only in the manner that our Father would have us act, seek, speak and do. That's meekness. So blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. May we have ears to hear and hearts to apply. Amen.